Peter, thanks again. Peter is an accomplished healthcare executive with 25 plus years of commercial operating experience, spanning pharmaceutical, drug device, diagnostic, and biotech sectors with a core focus on business development, sales, and marketing. Specific expertise includes startup, co-founder, effective oversight, and value creation within pre- and post-commercial stage organization, successful turnaround and M&A roles, which have resulted in accretive outcomes. Again, Peter, welcome to Beyond.
Glad to be here, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Peter, take us back to where it all started for yourself. Where did you grow up, and where did you go to college, and sort of how did your early career start?
Sure. So I grew up back in New York on Long Island. Only child. My dad was a World War II vet. Kind of a blue-collar world. My dad was a building superintendent. My mom was a nurse. Didn't have a lot of money growing up, but had a good family. But learned the value of working hard right from the very beginning. Worked odd jobs as a small kid, had a paper out. Graduated high school. I went to SUNY at Stony Brook, which is a state school. Worked full-time while I was going through college. Graduated college with the thought of potentially going to law school. Then I realized didn't have any money and didn't want to take on a huge amount of debt, and always grew up in a really patriotic family. Like I said, my dad had been in World War II. My uncle was also in World War II, and kind of grew up in that patriotic environment, and explored the possibility of going into the service. And ultimately what happened was, upon graduation of college, I went to officer candidate school with the Marine Corps. Got commissioned as a second lieutenant, and spent about a little over 4 years on active duty, and then a remaining probably 5 years in the reserves and the IRR. So that was where my early start came from.
So talk to us about your upbringing in the East Coast. How did the East Coast upbringing shape your worldview and how you approach life?
Good question. I mean, it was, I grew up on the sort of the eastern end of Long Island out in Suffolk County. I wouldn't say it's a small town, but relatively close community, good schools, great place to grow up, fairly close to the beaches. Like I said, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but there were a lot of things to do outside that weren't very expensive. It was a good foundation. Both my parents are from Long Island as well, so it was certainly home for us.
Nice. So there's the Army, there's the Navy, there's the Air Force, and then there's Marines. Why the Marines over any other service?
It's kind of a funny story. I'd always been kind of enamored with the Marine Corps. My dad was 17 in 1942. And wanted to go in the Marine Corps while World War II is going on, and my grandparents wouldn't let him because they said, if you go in the Marine Corps, you're probably not going to come back. So what my dad did was compromise, got them to let him go in at an early age, and went into the Navy. Ultimately, he went on PT boats, which is probably more dangerous than being in the Marine Corps. But growing up in that environment, I was always enamored with the Corps, and also I always played sports, loved challenges, and if I was going to go in and become an officer, that was the place I wanted to go, and certainly had the opportunity to experience a lot of challenges being on active duty.
Oh, 100%. Where were you stationed while you were with the Marines?
In a number of places. I was stationed initially in Quantico, Virginia. That's where officer candidate school is for the Marine Corps. And then after that, Marines do a thing, it's called the basic school, which it goes back to the Marine Corps ethos, where irrespective of what you're going to do, once you get out into the fleet, whether you're a data systems officer or a grunt, everyone goes through this essentially infantry training. So it's another 6 months back in Quantico. So went through that, and then I was part of the combat arms, which is infantry, tanks, or artillery, and I was an artillery officer. So I was stationed at Fort Sill and went through artillery training with the Army there. The Marine Corps shares that training with the Army. And then after that, I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, which is what brought me out to the West Coast. So I was with 11th Marines at Camp Pendleton, and then we did a fair number of deployments out of Camp Pendleton. Spent a lot of time out in 29 Palms, out in the desert, blowing things up. So it was fun as a 23-year-old.
Good times. You know what's funny about the Marines, and certainly true, and same with the Navy, is you guys end up in a lot of nice sea-based ports, if you will, given the
Sure.
nature of the mission, although you do go inland like 29 Palms. But it sounds like a lot of the places they can be stationed at are in really nice locales.
Yeah, the Marine Corps has got some pretty good locations. I mean, being stationed in 29 Palms wouldn't be my first choice, obviously out in the middle of the desert. But Quantico, Virginia, or Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton, Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. I mean, they've got some really nice bases. Most of them are obviously adjacent to large bodies of water. So we're fortunate there, as opposed to the Air Force, where you get stationed in Minot, North Dakota, or something in a missile silo, which probably would be suboptimal.
Right, exactly. So let me transition a little bit into your business career out of the Marines. So you've experienced
Sure.
tremendous progression in your career, serving in sales and marketing roles and taking on roles of ever increasing responsibility, including
Yeah.
VP general manager to chief marketing officer to chief operating officer. In each of these steps you've taken, what was a key ingredient that opened these doors to the next level of responsibility?
Well, I mean, part of it goes back to my upbringing, where it was really based on hard work, got nothing for free. Then in the Marine Corps, I mean, one of the things that is really a focus in the Marine Corps is being mission oriented, right? Doing whatever it takes to get it done. And what I like to say is, look, good, bad, or indifferent, what occurred through my experience in the Marine Corps has really kind of defined who I am today. And I carry that through business. And I think at the end of the day, if you work hard and really focus, good things will happen. Now, there's always things that will surprise you and not work out. But I truly believe there's no substitute for hard work. And like I said, growing up, I was always doing things like that. My goodness, when I was 7 or 8 years old, we had no money. If I wanted to buy something, I remember I would go down to the grocery store with a couple of my little friends, and we'd bag groceries for tips because my parents didn't have any money to give me. So it's things like that seemed harsh at the time, but looking back on it, that probably was good. And I've taken that into business, and that's how I made the transition off active duty and went into the sort of life sciences sector.
In terms of the role of chief commercial officer, that's not without a lot of responsibility, right? You're really in charge of driving the revenue of the company, the strategy, the marketing, messaging, et cetera. What would you say is your biggest challenge you faced as your roles or in your roles as chief commercial officer?
Well, it depends on where you are, what company I was at. I mean, I started my career at Abbott Laboratories, very big company. I was there for 11 years, had a lot of success there. But after about 11 years, I spent 4 years back at corporate and marketing and managed care. I kind of came to the conclusion that I wanted to take a shot at being at a smaller company and have a bigger impact on the overall business. When I was at Abbott, there were 60,000 employees there. So I was a director there, but you could only do so much. So I made the leap, and I left Abbott, came back out to the West Coast, and joined a sort of a mid-cap pharma company called Dura Pharmaceuticals. And in that role, I had a larger role. I was hired as a vice president. I had some equity there. I ran their entire managed care department and oversaw all of their contracted business, ran their primary care sales force for a while, and then we got acquired by an Irish company called Elan. And I would just say that I think the biggest challenges are keeping all the plates spinning at the same time. Overseeing a sales organization or just overseeing a commercial business in general, there are a myriad of moving parts, and that's probably the biggest challenge is to prioritize as well as keeping everything moving forward, and that's that can be a challenge sometimes depending on the state of the business.
Right, because not everything's in your power in the commercial realm. Like if you have a product that's not ready for showtime or a drug that they thought was ready that isn't ready, but you've committed to a forecast, that cannot be without its challenges.
Correct, and pharma is compounded even more greatly than other sectors by virtue of the fact that it's an incredibly heavily regulated industry. So there are lots of things that you might want to try to do to affect the business, but by virtue of the fact that the business is so heavily regulated by the government, there's only so many parameters that you can actually play in.
Exactly. That's a really good point. So in sales, you're certainly, as chief commercial officer, you are responsible for the number, and we all
Yeah,
know that forecasts not maybe will
that's
be
true.
maybe wrong, but will be wrong. Was there a time in your role as chief commercial officer where your team missed the number, and if so, how did you position this with the executive team or the board of directors?
There are always challenges with the numbers. I mean, I'll tell you a case in point. So, after I left Elan, after having been acquired, we did the integration. I actually co-founded a startup called Veris Pharmaceuticals, and it was probably one of the most enjoyable experiences in my career. It was myself and two other execs, and we essentially started that company on the back of a napkin. And we spent a couple of years defining the business. Ultimately, we raised $150 million for that business. And we acquired a product called Twinject, which was a competitor to EpiPen for treatment of anaphylaxis in kids. And it was kind of tough sledding on getting that business going. And the challenge was that we did a lot of primary market research with our key customers, which were physicians, who would tell us up front, yes, I will immediately start writing your product. But what we came to find is that it wasn't so much promoting the product, but it was changing habits and changing inertia for that product, and getting them out of the habit of using something that they had used for 25 years. So, it was an ongoing effort, always tempering what your forecasts are with the board and your investors, and caveating that, this is the data we have, but we have to get smarter about where this business is going to go. And I think the other really important thing to do when one is driving business, no one likes surprises. So what we always focus on doing is keeping our investors and senior leadership abreast of what was going on with the business. That's one of the things I learned at Abbott. That was a sort of a mantra there: no surprises, whether they be good or bad.
No, that's important.
And that's sort of helped me throughout my career.
No, that's great and sage advice. So let me transition here. Now you're managing director of life sciences at BioQuest Retained Executive Search.
Yeah.
And so you did a transition in your career. So first of all, talk to the audience about that transition, going from
Sure.
Operating companies to now really placing talent in these operating companies, and just that thought process of making that transition.
Absolutely. So, it didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't. I put a lot of thought into the decision. So, over the course of my career, I ran commercial businesses. When we sold our assets at that startup, I went on to a number of other pharma companies, and then I ran a number of commercial businesses in the diagnostic sector. And then most recently, the last life sciences position on the commercial side that I had, I was with a company called Depomed. They were based in Northern California, and it was a turnaround. They had a couple of opioids and some other products, but the company was certainly challenged. And I was contacted by their CEO, who I had the good fortune to work with before. He had run the pharma division at Abbott when I had been there. Anyway, to make a really long story short, we reconfigured that business. We moved it from Northern California to Chicago for a number of business reasons. And in 2018, I found myself commuting back and forth from Orange County to Chicago. So I logged 300,000 air miles and 900,000 Marriott points in 2018. And at the end of the year, I just, we had done a lot of good things about the business. It has since undergone an acquisition, which is good. But I came to a decision that I'm not going to continue to do that. I've got a son who plays college baseball out here on the West Coast, and I've got another son in high school, and I was never home. So I had been approached through the course of my career by recruiters on the executive side to join them and do this role. And it had always been in the back of my mind. So when I left Depomed at the end of 2018, I took the first part of 2019 off, and I got smarter about executive search. And I looked at a number of some of the larger firms, and I also looked at the firm that I'm with now called BioQuest. And I made a decision that that's what I wanted to do. And I've always liked challenges. I've always liked taking on new things. I think that's why after having left Abbott, I stayed with smaller companies, because I think they're very dynamic. Anyway, to kind of finish the story, what enamored me with BioQuest is it's a very unique and attractive executive search firm. They've been around for about 30 years. They're based downtown San Francisco in Northern California. They are laser focused in the life sciences sector. That's all they do. So they focus on diagnostics, pharma, medical device, and the interesting thing about the company is, though, that it's a boutique style executive search firm, but they were acquired by a much larger firm about 3 years ago called Diversified Search. And Diversified is in a number of different verticals. They're in academia, not-for-profit, healthcare, and they acquired BioQuest to augment their life sciences sector. So the way I saw BioQuest and what attracted me is you've got this laser-focused sort of Nordstrom's oriented service executive search firm. It's very high touch with our clients, but we have the very large resources that are needed for these executive searches found in Diversified. So it's the best of both worlds. And I joined BioQuest last April and never looked back, and really enjoy what I'm doing here. I think it plays to a lot of my strengths. I love working with people. I love evaluating talent. I've obviously done that throughout my whole career. I've built a number of different executive teams, and it also affords me the opportunity to interface with CEOs and board members. So I get the chance to learn about a lot of new businesses. And the way I try to set myself apart from other executive recruiters are that I have this industry experience, and I think that's unique. So when I interface with a CEO, I can tell them, look, I've sat on your side of the table. I've hired the people that you're probably looking to hire. I know what good looks like. And I think I can bring a really different angle to finding you really top talent for your organization. So
that's definitely a competitive advantage. Having had that
yeah.
experience and bringing that gravitas to the process is probably makes a lot of CEOs, executive teams much more comfortable in that process. So we're in these crazy times of COVID-19, the pandemic of the 20s, I guess I'd call it, because seems like 17, 20, 18, 20, 19, 20, 2020, there's something called a pandemic that hit. So now we're living through it in a pretty major way. How has COVID-19 affected the market for searches?
Yeah, really good. It's a good question. I think the jury is still out because we're still relatively early in this situation. I think it's an optimistic view, but I think it's true. I think, I think the general economic and business fundamentals in the sector have not evaporated. I think they're still there. I mean, if this were to lag on for a year or 18 months, I think it would have a long-term profound effect. But I think if we can start getting out of it in the relatively near future, I think we'll be able to come back relatively unscathed. What am I seeing with prospective clients out there? I would and keep in mind that the sector that we focus on is primarily early stage to mid-cap companies. So on the early stage side, with those organizations that are have been looking to close around or need to raise money, a little bit of a challenge for them. I think the venture community, the debt community, private equity, I think they're all kind of, for the most part, taking a little bit of a step back and just waiting to see how long this is going to play out. That said, though, I'm working with a number of companies who have still gotten their financing through this pandemic. Those companies that have funds and are moving forward with their strategic plan, certainly I think they've given it some thought about keeping their powder dry. But at the end of the day, they've got to move forward. And, they didn't get their funds to sit on them. It's not a bank account.
Right.
So their investors expect to invest those funds. The type of searches we do, which is normally, director level, but most are VP and C-level positions as well as board positions. They take 3 to 6 months to fill. And we focus on all functional areas. So whether it be, a CFO or VP of finance, or a head of sales or head of marketing, or placing CEOs in those positions, they take time. So we haven't seen a major hit yet, but there's a little bit of an air of caution out there is what I'm sensing. On the flip side, I think there's a pretty significant level of angst in the rank and file. So those individuals that are still employed at the executive level, I think there's some concern. I've certainly been contacted with a greater frequency unsolicited by executives, just wanting to make contact with me, making sure I have their resume, introducing themselves, those kinds of things, ensuring that they're in our database in case something happens. So that's kind of the landscape we're seeing right now.
Have you seen, you sort of answered my next question in part, but have you seen the market flooded with applicants who have been displaced by COVID-19? In other words, you have executives that have lost their jobs that are reaching out to you?
Not yet. I think it's much higher at the lower levels. So the field, I've worked with a lot of companies now, and I know for a fact there's been significant layoffs at the sales representative level. I mean, it's a problem for sales reps. I mean, it's going to be a while because reps, they can't go out and make calls. They can't leave their house. The doctor's offices are not going to allow them in. And if it's a hospital-based representative, they're not going to be able to get into the hospital. So I think it's greater at the lower levels. I have not seen, an overwhelming number of executives that have been laid off, at least at this point.
Right. So, it's interesting. Let me go back to something you said. Businesses will be challenged in this period of time, like never or none, or trying to get the right word. So business will be challenged like never before in these times. And while startups have money to go invest and develop, and depending on the stage of the startup, maybe it's early stage or they're further along, there's probably some maybe reticence in terms of what's the markets in the future for raising additional funds. Where does this thing ultimately land on the economy and the impact on the economy? And I suspect businesses need to fill positions, but will sometimes or ultimately push those decisions down the road. And I know you and I've talked about this. Yeah. What advice would you give CEOs that say, look, I got to get this person in? It's a 6-month process, but in their brains are thinking that maybe it's more like a 2-week or 1-month process. In other words, we'll get that position as we feel more comfortable as to where this pandemic is going and where we see our sector going, and then we'll engage Peter to bring someone in quickly. How should they think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten phone calls. One was a diagnostic manufacturing company in upstate New York, and they're actually going to make one of the COVID rapid tests. It's an ELISA technology, and they needed to scale from, I think, 3,000 tests a month to 300,000. And the question, so they needed a head of operations with deep experience, and their question was, how about like 72 hours? Can you do it in 72 hours? So there's a little naivete out there as it relates to that. So I think, stepping back, I think it's really important and incumbent upon myself and as an executive recruiter to really educate these CEOs, to help them understand that this is a process. These are really important roles, and you need to be forward-looking and give yourself the lead time to fill these positions. And when I have these conversations, because I'm engaged in discussions with a number of earlier stage companies that appear like they're slowing down a little bit. And what I try to tell them, look, this is not self-serving for me. I'm not trying to drive the business forward. I'm not doing this so you'll sign an agreement with me. What I'm telling you is that this is going to be over eventually, hopefully sooner than later. And if you try to wait till it's over and then try to hire, you're going to be way behind the curve. So it's in your best interest to start the process now.
So whether in a pandemic time or normal times, what does the process look like? Should I start 8 months before if I'm looking for a CEO or a VP, or what are those typical timeframes that when you're approached by a client, are they what timeframe they typically looking to fill those positions within?
Well, they always want it sooner than later, obviously. I mean, to place a CEO, that's a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal. And oftentimes we recruit people that are currently gainfully employed. So there's a process associated with that of extracting them from their current employment to go to another company. So for a C-level or even a senior vice president level, you're looking at a window of around 3 to 6 months. Now, I've placed people much more rapidly than that when the stars align. But to be transparent with, a potential client, they need to understand that there's that lead time. Because there's a process. Once they engage with you, then, the contract is signed, so that takes some time. Once that's done, then you spend time with the client and you define what the position description looks like. And that's somewhat of a process to make sure you're all aligned on what type of candidates you're looking for. And then we have a very large research department. Once that position description is defined, then that is handed off to the research department, and they begin identifying potential candidates at target companies. And then that comes back, and then there's a refocus with the client to make sure that we're aligned, and we give them ideas of what candidates look like. And then we start digging into the process. One of the, just as an aside, one of the beautiful things about BioQuest, and I won't name other executive search firms, but our competitors, many of them that are larger, oftentimes as a CEO or a board member, you would see someone like myself as a senior executive, a managing director, and I would be the person that would close the agreement with you. But then you probably wouldn't see me till the search is over. There'd be some junior person who would run that search to find the candidates. That's not the case with BioQuest. So the beauty of what we do is I own that search. I usually bring in a senior level search assistant, usually like the VP level, that'll assist me with the search. And then we have the research department, and we will tag team and we will own that search through the entire process. But it is a process.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So, in terms of the candidates you ultimately recruit, if you're looking at a CEO candidate, what would make that person successful in this process? In other words, what would give that person a better opportunity to land that job? Or are there other things at play that's out of the control of the candidate?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously there's the definition of what perfect looks like from the client, right? So that's a given, right? They have to fit whatever that filter is of requirements, whether it be, academic background, experience, fundraising, those kinds of things. There's normally, what I always ask a client once we define the job description, which is usually a couple of pages, what are the top 5 deal breakers for this candidate? If they don't check these 5 boxes, then you don't want to see them. For a CEO, oftentimes has raised funds, has been with an early stage company, understands the clinical development process, has had a successful exit, those kinds of things. So we identify those up front. So, I don't waste candidates' time. I don't waste the client's time, and we bring in, really, really quality individuals. So that's kind of defined and out of the candidate's hand. But if they fall into that category, then what are the other sort of less tangible things that a candidate, I think, needs to bring to the table? I think they need to be really responsive. I think they need to have a current and updated resume that's applicable to the opportunity. One thing that I would, anybody watching this video, some guidance I would give to prospective candidates out there, whether you're gainfully employed or not, this is a great time to take some time, take a look at your resume and update it. I'm still really busy, and I'm sure the executives are out there. They're probably just as busy, but take a look at that. Also, take a look at your LinkedIn account. Make sure it's current. Make sure your position description and how you define yourself on there is appropriate. Those kinds of things. So through that interview process, though, once you get your foot in the door, then it's being responsive. Oftentimes, a client will ask for certain things that they'll want to see, a list of references, a deeper definition of who they've worked with from a fundraising perspective, who their relationships are in the banking community, those kinds of things. And it's really important to provide those at very timely. Because if you don't, you may still be interested in the opportunity, but it'll come across that you may not be that interested in the opportunity. And that's not a positive thing.
Yeah, it's not one thing you want. So again, we're in COVID-19 times, and you're saying to these executive teams, executive committees, or boards of directors, let's move now, because it's a 6 to 8 month process. So the fact that we're in COVID and the fact we're doing this video podcast or podcast via Zoom, how many, or in the future, or even now, do you see a lot of these successful candidates that get pushed forward in the process, doing a lot of these interviews online? Because one of the things I've always sort of grappled with is the idea of a piece of paper that someone looks at and then takes your word for it, not until they actually meet that person in person, where they get the sense of the person, their personality, their voice, their command. the way they feel around that person almost.
Yep.
How do you see with COVID-19 the evolution of how they interview for candidates moving forward?
It's a real challenge right now, and we've discussed it in the firm. First of all, I live on Zoom and I live on Skype. And a lot of the earlier interviews are done that way prior to COVID. But one of the things that I always try to do with the previous searches we did before COVID, when we get down to the final number of candidates, I want to meet them in person. Because you're right, there's no substitute for having a face-to-face meeting over lunch or dinner to really get to know someone. That's really difficult now. And we've had discussions with our clients. We've had some instances where a candidate has gone and met in a parking lot of Starbucks with the board member, and they've sat in their cars across from each other and talked to each other through the window. So it's things like it's right. I mean, it's things like that. I have not yet placed an executive in a company that has not yet had a face-to-face meeting, but we're going down that path. I've got a number of searches that are currently ongoing right now. We've got a final group of candidates that are getting to the final stages, and even traveling is difficult right now. I mean, I'll give you one example. I'm doing a search with a diagnostic company, and they're located in Denver, but they've got their clinical development work being done with their scientists in Virginia. And one of the check boxes for the candidate to get this opportunity is to meet face to face with the clinical development team, and we can't do that. And credit to the CEO. He goes, I know, I wouldn't want to put a candidate in that kind of position, for the theoretical risk of getting on an airplane, flying one of our candidates in Dallas, flying to Dallas from, to the East Coast and doing that. So my guess in the near term for the searches that are, fairly well down the path, I think we are going to have some hires that are going to happen without that face-to-face meeting, or it's going to be that parking lot over a cup of coffee. I mean, one suggestion I made to one of the CEOs that we're working with is, we can help you coordinate a virtual dinner. Where you cater in dinner on your end, the candidate caters in dinner on their end. You sit like you and I are sitting right now and have dinner and just have a conversation.
Absolutely.
And I think that'll happen. I do.
I think it's times demand for creative alternatives, and I think it's not necessarily a bad way. The idea that you can connect with a candidate much sooner via video,
Sure.
I think is a good thing. So as you go through a search, and now you're looking at a list of candidates for a CEO opportunity, how many candidates will you recruit for one search?
Well, like I said, first the search goes to research. For a CEO, we may identify 150 potential candidates, and then that continually gets whittled down and whittled down. I would say, when we get down to the point where I'm doing interviews with those candidates, every search is different, but it could easily be 24, maybe 36 potential candidates for that role. And we weed them out. They may look good on paper, but there's no substitute for this, this kind of interaction, albeit over the computer. One of the things that, we pride ourselves at BioQuest on is that we never stop the search until a candidate is placed. So even, for example, we're doing this head of BD search. I've got a number of really, I think, top candidates in the pipeline. We are continuing to do the early stage outreach and to continue to fill our pipeline of candidates. Like I said, until that search is concluded, that candidate accepts the opportunity and they start.
Right. Always have a backup plan, right? Because you just never know.
Always.
So if I'm a candidate and I'm working with you, what is the secret to getting selected for a position, given the number of people you actually recruit for a position? Is it multifactorial, or is there certain tendencies you've seen that successful candidates have exhibited?
Yeah, I think, I develop a really strong relationship with the candidates as well. And that's the other side of my job that I really enjoy. I mean, throughout my career, I've been called numerous times by recruiters and looked at opportunities. And, in some cases, you never hear back from the recruiter. You don't even know what happened at the end of the day. I made a commitment to myself that any candidate that I interface with, I'm going to be completely transparent with them, whether they're moved forward for the opportunity or not. But with that candidate, if they're solid, some of the things that I'll do outside of perhaps outside of the norm, is help them with their CV. I'll help educate them on what good looks like. In fact, I'll do that with people that are not even in the line for a job. In fact, I just did it yesterday. A CEO who I had worked with at a company just left his role. And he asked me if I'd take a look at his resume. I went through the resume, I redlined it, I changed it. I also gave him recommendations for what he should have on LinkedIn. And I just think that, look, at the end of the day, I believe in karma and doing the right thing and helping people. And this is all about networking. He's a good guy. So, I wanted to help him. And I do the same thing with our candidates. The other thing that is really important for candidates if they're seeking an opportunity is to get smart about the company. When I was on the other side of the desk, hiring people, hiring VPs, hiring CFOs, there were numerous times where a candidate would come in who looked really good on paper, and then I start asking not even granular questions, but more general questions about my business and my company, and they couldn't answer those questions. And for me, that's a deal breaker. I think you need to get smart about the company. I think you need to understand what's going on there. Look, if you're a senior executive out there and don't know, what their profits were for, last year, or what their core products are, or who's on their board of directors, you're gonna potentially get yourself in a situation that is going to be awkward.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal advice. It's like I remember I was working on a deal with a company that got acquired by J&J, and I was talking to the CEO, and he said, I said, you either fired up with enthusiasm or you get fired with enthusiasm. And I think the job search is no different. That if you're entering into this phase of your career for whatever reason, or if you're engaged in somebody who already has a job, no matter what, it's your brand. So you always should be fired up about the opportunity, learning as much as you can, digging as deep as you can, because you never know where it leads, right? You make an impression. Maybe you don't take the opportunity, but down the road, you just never know how that's going to come back in a positive or potentially negative way, depending on how one's prepared. So let me ask you the next question, though. For those candidates who were not selected, and I like what you were saying, you help people with their CV. That's very quality. But for those candidates that were not selected for a given opportunity that you presented to them, how do you engage them moving forward to ensure that the relationship stays intact for future opportunities?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I sort of touched upon it a second ago, but the bottom line is I made a commitment to myself when I decided to come into this role, is that anyone that I interacted with that gave me their time and went through a process, even if they didn't get the role, and obviously most will not get the role. I mean, if you think about it, right? I mean, there's usually a large basket of candidates that are in the running, but only one person is going to get that job. I take the time to call every candidate and let them know, what's going on, why they weren't selected, and also what I could potentially do from an advice perspective to help them get their next opportunity, and offer that up to them, and attempt to maintain that relationship, and handle the right way. There's usually no harm, no foul. They understand. I mean, I'm not working with rookies out there. These are all senior people, out of life sciences, so they get it. But I think it's really important. I mean, they're uncomfortable conversations, right? You don't want to call somebody and say, "Hey, I know you're really excited about that opportunity, but unfortunately you weren't selected. But here's why. And here's what I would suggest you do in the future. And oh, by the way, I'm looking at potentially another opportunity that may come my way, and you might be perfect for that." So it's that type of approach.
Yeah, it's good. How would you say that recruiting differs between startups and maybe a Fortune 500 company?
Yeah, so from a startup perspective, the type of candidates usually have a much broader experience base. Even at the VP level, they've oftentimes have come up through big pharma or big diagnostic companies, learn their craft. I'm a classic example of that. I spent 11 years at Abbott Laboratories, and then I went to smaller companies, and at a smaller company, you need to be prepared to take on responsibilities that are not necessarily in your job description. For some people, that's great, and that's what always attracted me to smaller companies. If you're looking to fill roles in a bigger company, the focus tends to be a little bit more myopic. It's much more specific, much more clearly defined, and they're usually looking for a different background.
Right. And so let me go back. We talked about the successful candidate gets the role, and we talked about the criteria that's used to select the candidate, their skill sets that ultimately burble them to the top of the list for the selection. But when we think about that, how important, if you look at it on a balance, 50-50, how important is the experience and their skill set versus their personality and the board's desire to even work with this person, right? Because if you say, look, this guy may be shy in these areas, but however, he's got or she's got a phenomenal way with people, a personality, a way of engaging and leading that maybe you can't quantify. What does that balance look like in your experience? Is it just pure they got the experience on paper, or when they interview they're the best, or is it really come down to, I want to be in business with this person. I want to work with this person to grow this business?
The answer is yes. Culture is incredibly important. I'm doing a CEO search right now, and I would say it's a 50-50 split between the sort of the specific experience criteria and a cultural fit. So my advice to candidates, though, is don't try to be a chameleon. Be yourself, because you don't want to be someone different and get that role and then find out you're not a good fit culturally with that company. At the end of the day, the experience is kind of black and white, right? I mean, that is what it is. That's what's on paper. But how you interface with a leadership team is critical. And every leadership team is different. I'm doing a CEO search right now where a vast majority of the leadership team, it's high science. So they all have lots of letters after their names. And the culture and the vibe there is different from the other placements that I've made where it's a sort of an ongoing commercial concern. Different environment, different field, different set of players. And it's going to be a different personality set of the individual going in there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight, great advice, and great perspective. So let me switch gears to something a little less scientific and career-based. Who's been the most influential person in your life, and why?
I would have to say my father. My father grew up in the Depression, was one of the hardest working people I ever knew. Growing up, like I said, we didn't have a lot. My dad was an apartment superintendent, but also worked a second job to earn more money, never complained ever, put his head down and just did the right thing for the family. Really good person, served in World War II, served his country, and I would say he is on the top of my list of influential people that have affected, good, bad, or indifferent, who I am today.
That's wonderful. So what is the most important lesson you've ever learned in life?
Gosh, I think,
or should I make that plural, lessons?
There's a lot, right? I would say a number of things. One, like I started out, there's no substitute for hard work. And things are not always going to work out perfectly for you. But you can stack the odds in your favor if you work hard and do the right things. That's one life lesson that I've always lived by, try to instill into my kids. The second life lesson that I would say, me personally, my career is really important to me, but there's nothing more important than my family. That is the most important thing. I've got two boys that are phenomenal. I've been married coming up on 30 years, so I've been blessed. At the end of the day, your career is important, plays a big role in your life and pays the bills. But there's no substitute for your family and being in a great place. I've been really fortunate. I've been blessed.
That's wonderful. So maybe a little bit of a tag along onto that for future generations that'll listen to this. Is there any wisdom you'd like to pass on to them? What would you want them to know?
I would say have an open mind and explore different opportunities. I mean, shoot, when I was graduating college and going to the Marine Corps, if somebody said, "Oh, by the way, you're gonna be in pharma, and then you're gonna be in diagnostics, and then you're gonna be an executive recruiter," I think you need to be somewhat opportunistic. I think you need to be open to trying new things. I talk to my boys about that all the time, and I think what else is really important, and it's easy to say do something that makes you happy, because you don't always know what's going to make you happy.
Right.
But my advice would be, especially for younger people coming up, going through college and looking to get into a career, if you find yourself in an early job or an early career that you really don't like, life's kind of short. My advice would be try something different. I've been fortunate. I love being in the Marine Corps, but it's not something I want to do for 20, 25, 30 years. I love life sciences and working at Abbott, but being in the big corporate environment, I felt I love the life sciences, but I kind of wanted to have an opportunity to have more control over a company. So I made that change, and then I went over to diagnostics, which was radically different from pharma. And you're never too old to try things. I mean, here I am in the latter part of my career, doing something completely different and just enjoying the heck out of it.
Yeah, no, so I can tell by your passion in your voice and when I've met you on several occasions. So is there anything that you'd like to cover with the audience or share with the audience that we haven't covered?
I think that's it. I mean, just philosophically on the times we're sitting in now, I mean, look, these are challenging times, and we don't know how things are going to turn out, but I'm optimistic. I think we're going to get through this. Look, in America, we've gotten through many, many difficult things over the course of our history, and this is just a speed bump. And I think, those people that put their head down, work hard, and stay focused, and stay optimistic, we'll get through this and good things will happen. I have no doubt about that.
Absolutely. So Peter, where can they learn more about you or get connected with you at BioQuest?
Sure. So, I think I can help in a number of ways. Obviously, from an executive placement perspective, if anyone wants to contact me, I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you about finding senior leadership. For those of you out there that would like to get some advice as it relates to your resumes or how you look on LinkedIn, again, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you and do whatever I can to assist. Ben, I don't know if you want me to share my phone number, but I'm more than happy to do that now. People can give me a call. I'm fine with that.
Well, maybe if you want to give them your BioQuest contact information, they can go to the website. Maybe that may be a better way.
Absolutely. So my email at BioQuest is my last name. So it's Schineller at BioQuestInc.com. And just drop me an email, and I promise you I will get back to you on that.
Fantastic. Peter, thanks so much for coming on Beyond. Really enjoyed the conversation.
It was great. Thanks for the opportunity. I enjoyed it as well, and look forward to seeing you again soon, Ben. Take care.